Angela Smith, 19, Keene State College sophomore.
My name is Allison Tomiso. I'm 25 years old and I am a PE teacher.
My name is Abby Hoy, Abbeyhoye. I am 19 and I am a Keene State student.
I'm Cindy Hoy, Hoye. I'm 58, I have to think a moment, and I'm a second grade teacher here, and I'm also the director of the child care program.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say I'm a 7 at proficiency with technology.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give myself a 5 on my proficiency of using technology.
On a good day, probably 7. On a bad day, probably 4.
On a scale from 1 to 10, I think that I am about a 9.
I use technology to meet up with friends, do homework for school, and just make life easier.
I do it every day because I usually have my phone on me, so technology is in my life every day and at school. Every day I have my phone with me, so I use, I go on Facebook, check Facebook. I use my iPad at school for grading and using different apps for some of my PE classes, so I use technology, I guess, almost every day.
I use technology every day. I use technology to check weather updates, traffic updates, social networking, and classes.
In my everyday life is email for work here. I also use technology, the cell phone a lot. We use the Safari for that, for location of different venues or places, things we might want to go to. I use the texting very frequently with my family.
I would use technology differently for work as more typing rather than just fooling around, I guess.
For fun, I'm usually using my phone, text people on Facebook, Snapchat. For school, work, I'm usually using it for grading or looking up things to teach.
I'm not sure that I use it so much differently for work. I use email instead of texting. I suppose I still look up things for work here, different methods of teaching, different activities to teach a different subject, something to sort of spice it up a little. I think that I use a printer more often here because I print it out for my class.
My life would be different without modern technology because it would just be harder to communicate with friends and meet up with people and just do things.
It'd be interesting. My life would be interesting if I didn't have access to technology. I guess I'd feel a little disconnected from people, maybe. It'd probably make my job a lot harder if I didn't have technology. Because I get a lot of my teaching ideas from different PE websites and things like that. So I think it'd make things a little difficult.
Honestly, I think my life would be way better. I think that I'd be able to focus more on the people and the things around me as opposed to other stuff going on in other countries that doesn't pertain to my life.
I think I would be a better typist and probably a better speller because it wouldn't be so easy to correct those mistakes. How would life be? Well, I grew up without a lot of technology, so to speak, and it certainly makes life easier. So I think that without it, it would be more difficult and challenging and tedious. So you can get a lot done in a much shorter amount of time.
I think technology has a disadvantage to learning because I feel like you can't get the same feel from reading off a screen as opposed to reading off paper or a book. And I also feel like it's distracting, so your brain can't focus on one thing at once.
I think that it impacts learning in a multitude of ways. I think that students, I have noticed that when they are on the computer for lengthy amount of time, or they're frustrated by it or even excited by it, it's very difficult for them to let it go and just change directions into something else. I find it creates a certain amount of frustration or excitement physically within them so that it carries over into a lot of different dimensions. However, that being said, I also think that it opens up a humongous opening for them to discover and look up and use for so many different ways. So I think that they're really fortunate to have it. at this time.